This is the World Organic News for the week ending 13th of November 2017. John Moore reporting. I'll begin this week with a big thank you to Calamari87, writing for Aussie gardeners who left an uplifting review for this podcast on the Australian iTunes store back on 30th of October. Thank you so much. Given there are over 180-odd national iTunes stores around the world, I don't always get to check each of them every week. If you've left a review and I haven't yet given you a shout-out, I will get to you. In the meantime, thank you. So this week we are focusing upon two main themes which coalesce into one. To begin, we have a post from Robert Scribbler, Sleeping Ice Giants Stir. East Antarctica's Totten Glacier accelerates towards Southern Ocean. Quote, East Antarctica, home to most of the world's remaining land ice. Scientists previously thought that this last bastion of somewhat stable ice in the world would only slowly succumb to the slings and arrows of human-caused climate change, that its ice giants would still sleep for some time, giving the world more time to stave off or avoid worsening rates of sea level rise. Unfortunately, new evidence reveals that this is not the case, that the best time to act on sea level rise was 20 plus years ago, that the second best time to act in cutting fossil fuel-based CO2 emissions is now, end quote. A bit like the Chinese proverb relating to the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago and the second best time is now, this post highlights the dangers to cities across the globe. Whilst reams of words have been spilt on the melting ice in the Arctic Ocean's ice cover, it has little, if any, effect on sea level. Why? Because much of the ice is over water. As we all know, when a glass of liquid water with ice cubes in it is left alone, the melting of the ice cubes does not raise the level of the liquid in the glass. This is the Arctic situation. In the southern hemisphere, the South Pole is on a continent, an ice-covered continent. Similar to the glacial situation during the last ice age, or more correctly glacial period, sea levels are up to 100 metres lower, so land bridges existed across the Bering Strait between the Australian mainland and Tasmania, and the UK was connected to the European mainland. As those northern glaciers melted, the current landforms we know and love were formed. As the Antarctic glaciers, the sleeping giants of the quote, get mobile, we are in deep Sturm. Another quote. Researchers found that combined warm winds and encroaching warmer ocean currents had caused the glacier to speed up to 5% during the period of 2000 to 2006. This acceleration means that the vast glacier, home to enough ice to raise sea levels by 11 to 13 feet, is melting faster. It also means that the glacier is starting to succumb to the tremendous global heat forcing provided by human fossil fuel burning around the world. We should caution that this report covers a period from more than a decade ago, and since that time, human-forced global warming has considerably advanced, end quote. So while many people have been arguing about the survival of polar bears and the probability of oil drilling in the Arctic seas, the Antarctic glaciers have been waking, and we should too. To keep the cheery news flowing, Camel Athley posts that the Earth enters fifth year of devastating heat from the World Meteorological Organization. Following the links in the post, we arrive at the News Daily site and the following worrying quote. Quote, the last 5 years are set to be the hottest on record according to the World Meteorological Organization. In an official statement released on Monday at the opening of the United Nations COP23 Climate Change Conference in Bonn, Germany, the World Meteorological Organization said 2013 to 2017 would break records, which is significant given 2017 did not experience the El Nino boost, end quote. Before we all run to our happy places and pretend none of this is real, we can take steps. A post from Elena Suglia entitled New Study, Individual Actions Against Climate Change Do Matter. I'd like to point out that Elena is an ecologist and science communicator. A link to her blog is in the show notes. From the post, quote, researchers found that behavioural shifts could be faster than waiting for national climate policies and widespread energy transformations. As far as I know, this is the very first comprehensive analysis of the effectiveness of specific individual climate actions, end quote. There is a handy infographic illustrating what we can do, and I'll post that in the show notes on the blog site. There is indeed hope. From the blog Agrication comes the post Soil, the hidden weapon against climate change. Now, not surprisingly to long-term listeners, the soil is the hope of the world, if and only if we stop treating it as a widget in an industrial system. The damage done has been horrific. Quote, since the introduction of industrial farming methods, the percentage of fertile soil has dramatically decreased. While the amount of cultivated land globally has increased, it's lost nearly 70% of its original carbon stock, and only 3% of the American tall prairie grass remains. End quote. There's a number to contemplate, 70% of its original carbon stock. The post goes on to point out that continuing along the industrial path is nothing more than the route to Malthusian famine, and no one wants a famine, ever. The point with famines in the 21st century, and for the past 2 or 3 centuries, is that they are entirely man-made, and I use the word man consciously. We can change to soil-nurturing ways. We can feed everyone on the planet at the moment and into the future. Wars, political choices, economic gouging, and plain old-fashioned disregard for others are the main causes of famine and have been since about 1700. I've covered the various ways we can add more carbon to the soils of the world in previous episodes, but I found a post this week on the blog Clean Energy Diary entitled Carbon Recycling Technology. Quote, carbon recycling technology synthesises a synthetic fuel CH4, a hydrocarbon known as synthetic natural gas, using carbon from CO2 emissions of gas-based power plants and renewable hydrogen generated using renewable energy sources such as hydro, solar, wind, biothermal, and biomass, etc. End quote. So basically, by using renewables to generate electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen and combining with power station emissions, it is possible to create a carbon-neutral fuel. I've also read research elsewhere on using algae to produce biodiesel and so on. Yet these technological approaches may not even be necessary. Last year, and for the past few years, one Australian state, South Australia, has had electricity supply issues. Placed as it is, South Australia receives winds directly off the hot centre of the continent, creating summer days way above 40 degrees C. This, with the lowering costs of installing aircon, has put huge loads on the grid. The blog Anti-Nuclear reports record low electricity demand in South Australia due to rooftop solar. There is, of course, a link in the show notes. And this is likely to continue globally, as a post from the blog Coyote Gulch citing Bloomberg states. Building solar and wind farms has started to become a cheaper proposition than running aging coal and nuclear generators. Price signals will out-trump power politics most of the time. And yes, I intended the plethora of puns in that statement. And on that self-satisfying moment, I'll finish up for the week. A transcript for the episode is available at www.worldorganicnews.com/90. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back at the same time next week.